Welcome to Flunking the Written, a fully spoiled Buffy the Vampire Slayer podcast in which two Uber fans break down every episode of the show. Join Kimberly and Megan every Tuesday as they overanalyze each scene and discuss the Buffyverse at large. Now let's meet up with the Scoobies and get into this week's episode of Flunking the Written.
What can I say? I flunked the written.
Alright, Kim, we are at Innocence, a very significant episode of Buffy for many reasons. One of the biggest reasons is because this is when Buffy officially switches to Tuesday nights.
Okay.
Fun bit of trivia that I think I knew at one point, but originally Surprise aired on Monday night, which was the original night that Buffy aired, and then the very next night they ran Innocence, and that's when it permanently shifted to Tuesday nights.
I did not know that.
It is written and directed by Joss Whedon himself, and the blurb is, Buffy must battle not only the judge, but also Angel, who has lost his soul after experiencing a moment of true happiness.
Oh my goodness, they just tell you, don't they?
Yeah.
They're just like, oh, yep, not going to be a surprise.
All right, so we start in the factory, and here's another bit of trivia that I did not know about this factory, but apparently the factory's name is Brick and Brock. Did you know this?
I did not. In the script book, they call it the factory.
Yeah, I've always just called it the factory, and everybody on the show calls it the factory, but on the, Buffy wiki, it has an official name, and I don't know where it's pulled from. I tried to figure it out, but apparently it's called Brick and Brock, is the official name of the abandoned factory.
Okay, well, they never call it that in the script, or so far they haven't called it that in the script.
So, Spike is there doing what Spike does best, is just whining about Angel and Buffy.
Yep, pretty much.
That's his job right now. And I made this comment in my notes, but I really love his wheelchair. I love that he has a black and red wheelchair. That's just so Spike.
Basically, they're kind of talking about how the judge is just sitting there and not doing anything yet. And he says he's kind of preparing to get ready to go kill people.
Yeah.
And his strength is growing. And Spike complains that he's bored and he wants to go kill people.
Yeah, I noted that, Spike is just really overconfident around the judge.
Yes, very much. There's a line here that is cut out when Spike is trying to get the judge to, go kill people. Where the judge explains that I fought an army and they hacked me to pieces. For 600 years, my living head lay in a box buried in the ground. I've learned to be patient. And I thought that was pretty funny.
Yeah. And as we know, Spike never learns that lesson.
No. And then Drew kind of has a sharp pain and she falls down and cries out, and they keep asking her, or Spike keeps asking her, the judge doesn't seem to care. Spike says, what is it? What's the matter, Drew? Do you see something? And she just cries out, Angel.
Mm-hmm. She has this creepy grin that comes across her face, and I just love it when she's just fully relishing the moment she's been waiting for.
Okay, so the next episode, Phases, is the very first one that I ever watched. Mm-hmm. I wish that I had seen this episode without already knowing that he was going to lose his soul, because I cannot imagine how cool it was to experience that in this next scene. So we have Buffy waking up in the bed where she had went to sleep with Angel, and she kind of looks around for him and calls out to him, and there's a flash of lightning and some thunder. It's storming, and then we're in the alleyway outside Angel's apartment, and he's on his knees in the rain. We see a woman who is obviously a professional, and she walks through and asks him if he's okay, which doesn't seem very smart to me. And ask him if he wants her to call 911, and he says no, the pain is gone, and jumps up and bites her and drinks. And it's like, oh no, Angel, what are you doing? What are you doing, Angel? And I wish I knew what that moment felt like for people who were watching this for the first time and had no idea what was happening.
I can't remember if I've mentioned this before in the podcast, but I started in season 6, so I have a lot of moments like that.
Yeah. Well, my moments like that are mostly over now because the very next episode, Phases, is the one that I watched when it aired. Mm-hmm. And after that, I was hooked and just always watched. So I'll be able to answer that question from now on.
Awesome. I look forward to that. Such a significant moment. Such a great shot with the smoke and him breathing it out. I mean, even when you know it's coming, it's still a gut punch. This is the reason why season 2 remains one of my absolute favorites, is this kind of character twist that they do with Angel and make him the villain. And hugely significant episode of Buffy that we're about to get into. And
very much.
This is just the tip of the iceberg, kind of setting it up. But man, that first encounter with Angelus proper, because at this point we hadn't experienced any flashbacks or anything like that. This is the first time that we really see Angel without a soul, and
he does it well.
It's such a notable difference right off the bat. Mm-hmm. So after the credits, we see Buffy entering her house through the back door and kind of trying to sneak upstairs. But Joyce catches her, but it's okay because they actually had a whole excuse of how she was staying the night over at Willow's, and she totally forgot about that. Basically, the only notable thing here is just the juxtaposition of Joyce kind of noting that something's off.
Different.
Yeah, something's off. Like something, she starts to say, you just look, and then kind of stops herself. And then Buffy ends up going upstairs to get ready for school. Not a huge amount of Joyce in this episode, but I think the 2 scenes with her are significant in a way that this scene, if this had been like the direction that they had gone, this scene would have really irritated me, because I don't like the notion of sex changing you, or the power of sex and all of this stuff being like
making you look different.
Yeah. Like, and that's kind of what it feels like this scene is doing, but I think it's doing it in order to set up the later scene. It's the whole idea of this is the moment where Buffy's struggling with her quote-unquote loss of innocence, and then at the end of the episode, it's kind of a mission statement to say, no, she still has that, she's still the same person. And that's what the significance of the 2 Joyce scenes, in my head at least.
I think this scene would have been better and made more of an impact if it was the end of the episode when Joyce was like, you look different. Mm-hmm. After everything she goes through.
Yeah.
And not just sex.
Yeah. Everything else is what's really changing her. The experience of losing Angel and having that weird guilt that Buffy seems to always place on herself, and then the emotional state that she's in after all of the different ranges of support and betrayal that she's felt. Mm-hmm. From there, we cut to the library. Xander's entering. He apparently spent the night at the bus station, as well as other members have checked out the docks and the airport, and no sign of any of the boxes for the judge. So they're kind of assuming that the judge has been assembled and are worried about the fact that Buffy hasn't checked in. And Xander's all like, let's go to the factory, and Cordy is brilliantly stating the obvious, that they don't stand a chance against the judge.
And do what? Besides be afraid and die?
Xander fires back, and Cordy looks hurt. This is kind of a more significant beat as far as their relationship than I remembered it being. But the way that Charisma plays this, it really seems to hurt her more than a lot of the things that Xander says about her. And
and there is a very specific instruction in the script book that she is to look hurt. Yeah. She's supposed to be stung by what he says.
Yeah. And Giles agrees with Cordelia, which may be a first. And Xander, in just the worst fashion ever, says those of us who are born with feelings are going to do something about this. Which is just
rude.
Very rude, but also exactly what Xander would say. Willow is team be afraid and die, and they start to leave as Buffy enters the library.
Yes. And Xander says, we were going to rescue you. And Willow's like, well, some of us. And Giles says, I would have.
Yeah.
And I find that exchange very funny.
Yeah.
And Jenny asks where Angel is, because, she's kind of obsessed with Angel now. Supposed to be. We know why. But she's worried something's going to happen. So she's like, where's Angel? And Buffy is like, I don't know. You don't know?
Mm-hmm.
She gives the info on the judge that he's put together. And they kind of do some talking about Angel and where he could be. Giles decides to keep researching the judge, and the rest of them go to class. That's pretty much it. It's a whole lot of conversation for
it is
basically that.
Yeah, it is the exposition in case you missed last week's episode and don't know who the judge is.
Yeah, kind of.
And I have the oddest note about the next scene. So the next scene is Willow kind of catches up with Buffy. And I don't know why this caught my attention so much this episode. But on the wall is an anti-drinking and driving poster that I don't think I've ever noticed before. But it's got a very lengthy, blurb about drinking and driving on it. And I paused it and I wrote it down word for word because I thought it was hilarious. It says, if the thought of losing your life doesn't keep you from drinking and driving, imagine losing your license.
Okay. I mean, I guess the teenagers might think that was worse.
I loved it, though. It made me so happy.
So then we have two scenes here that were cut out.
Okay.
We have a scene where they're in a classroom and Buffy is listening to a teacher talk about history and the Bolsheviks and what really happened with them. And then Buffy, who's been staring off into space and staring at the clock and just being real anxious and nervous, gets up and walks out of class. And the teacher's like, Miss Summers, I'm sorry. Did you need to be somewhere else? And Buffy just leaves.
So, an interesting thing about that scene, I actually knew about that scene because I watched this episode with the commentary, and Joss Whedon talked about that scene and how they actually filmed it and ended up cutting it for time. But then he said he felt like it was probably a good thing that they cut it because what he was going for just did not translate at all. He was like, I was trying to be too artsy and it did not work.
Well, and then the scene right after that is Buffy going to Angel's apartment to look for him. And she goes in and kind of walks around a little bit looking for Angel and then leaves.
Mm-hmm. Just a lot of wandering, aimless Buffy.
Pretty much. Neither one of them really advanced the plot at all. But I think they were just maybe time killers.
Yeah.
And then we have the scene where Angel shows up at the factory.
It's my favorite.
Yes, it is really good.
Before Angel shows up, you have this beautiful, beautiful exchange between Spike and Drew.
Are we feeling better then?
I'm naming all the stars.
You can't see the stars, love. That's the ceiling. Also, it's day.
I can see them. But I've named them all the same name. And there's terrible confusion.
Man, if there isn't a more Spike and Drew interaction than that.
There's really not. It's so perfect.
Following that, he's asking about Angel and if she knows what's happened to him. And Angel enters and does a bit about his Broadway dream. And Spike is, again, whiny. It's kind of his main
right now.
Yeah, his main thing right now. But Angel continues with the bit and talks about as long as there is injustice in the world, as long as there is scum like you walking, well, rolling, I'll be around. Look over your shoulder, I'll be there. To which Spike is just like, yeah, look over your shoulder. And the judge is there to serve the only purpose really for the judge to serve, that is to prove without a shadow of a doubt that this is not a fake out and that Angel is in fact clean, as the judge would say, meaning he has no humanity at all.
Mm-hmm. Which is kind of useless for a big bad, the way they've built up the judge.
Yeah. And it's like, straight up, Joss Whedon admits that in the commentary. He's like, yeah, the judge is just kind of there for this purpose, and that's why we needed him, because we needed to make sure that the audience 100% knew that this was actually happening, and that there was no way that we were going to backpedal on it.
And they have a little conversation about how it's really true. Angel has lost his soul again. They're both so happy. Drusilla's so happy.
Spike's happy, which doesn't last.
Yeah, we're family again, and Spike is thrilled. Spike starts talking about killing the Slayer, and Angel's like, yeah, let's not do that yet. I want to mess with her. Which is kind of what Angel does.
Mm-hmm. It's interesting to me. There's a couple of weird things in this scene, and it gets more to it later in the scene where they talk about destroying the world, which again feels like something that Spike and Drew really wouldn't be that invested in. And in this scene specifically, Angel is just like, yeah, that's all cool, but I'm more like interested in the Slayer, which would totally be Angelus's route, right? That would totally be what he's fixated on and his patterns and everything that we know about him. But then, at the end of the season, and I don't even really remember what the justification is, he's the one who's just like, yeah, let's end the world, why not?
True. Spike's the one that doesn't want to, yeah.
They kind of flip roles, and it's kind of like, it never really makes sense for any of them to want to end the world, but at one point or another, all of them
right, because like,
let's give it a crack, right?
What are they going to drink when they end the world?
So, another thing to note here, when Spike is first kind of trying to, like, reason through all of this, and it's just like, no more of this, I've got a soul crap, there's this very specific shot of Angel lighting a cigarette, and he says, what can I say? I was going through a phase. And I mentioned this a little bit in the last episode, but in this shot, you can see very clearly that he still has the Claddagh ring on, but it is now indicating that he is single, as he says this line, which is very, very telling. But then Spike also says the line that it made him sick to his stomach seeing Angel be the Slayer's lapdog, and I'm just like, ooh.
Yep. Don't tell the future there, Spike. Next, after that, they talk about how Angel wants to work on the Slayer, which basically mess with her head. And Spike says, you really got a yin to hurt this girl, haven't you? And I've just, in my notes, I've just got like, well, don't you? Like, that's all Spike has wanted to do this whole time. And now he's acting like it's weird that somebody wants to harm the Slayer.
Yeah.
Like, he's been obsessed with that for, 8 episodes now? Yeah, I was like, pot kettle.
Yeah. I feel like this is the weakest Spike is in this episode. And apparently, originally, there was some dialogue. I don't know if it's in the script or if it's something else. But Joss Whedon was talking about it in the commentary that he originally intended some of the bickering between Spike and Angel to happen in this scene, but they cut it because it existed later in the episode.
It is cut. Yeah, it's not in the script.
It really feels like just weird. Like, Spike just feels weird. Like, he's so excited that Angel doesn't have his soul. He's like, this is great. This is so great. And it just doesn't really match anything that we've seen so far, and definitely anything that we see after this between, like, these two characters. Like, they have had a couple of moments where they kind of get along, but at this point, Spike really doesn't like Angel and certainly does not trust him around Drew at all. But we don't get that right away. At first, he's just excited.
Yeah, and there's a scene at the end of this encounter that was cut. They're talking about everything being like old times, and Angel runs his hand along Drusilla's arm, and we see Spike's smile fade.
Yeah. That's probably what Joss Whedon was referring to.
That was cut out, but there's no bickering. There's like no conversation really. They're just talking about old times, and then he does that, and Spike's smile disappears, and then the scene is over.
Yeah.
So.
Another note that definitely doesn't feel like big picture Spike. Like, at this moment, it's fine. But thinking about the full context of Spike, the fact that he mentions that they have 4-against-1 odds, and that's, the kind of odds he likes to play, is really not true when you look at the history of Spike.
Oh no, Spike likes to do stuff on his own.
Spike likes to go and seek out slayers just 'cause. And one final note before we move on from this scene. It just was happenstance. But that moment when Angel grabs Spike and is all threatening and then kisses him on the forehead.
And they bust out laughing?
Yeah. I paused during that moment to kind of catch up on my notes for a second. And I paused in such a way that the screenshot is like Angel with his tongue slightly out and he's licking his lips, and the two of them, their noses are literally touching, and Spike's eyes are half closed, and I'm just like, that looks completely different than what it actually
it's supposed to be. Yeah.
It was a very intimate moment that I paused on that wasn't actually anything close to what it looked like, but it made me laugh for a long time.
Well, I mean, if you're a really big fan who's watched all the way through Buffy and all the way through Angel, you know some stuff about that. So. Okay, the next scene, we are back in the library. Cordelia's walking through with a book in her hand, and she walks past, and Willow's on the phone. Xander's, there. Willow, she's talking on the phone to Buffy, and basically, no, I haven't heard from Angel. She hangs up, and they kind of talk about how Buffy has spent all day looking for Angel. She's checked everywhere, and she's beat up Willie the Snitch a couple of times. So, she's went there a couple of times to look for Angel. And that Buffy is on her way to the library. She's just going to go change clothes. Then Xander gets up and heads to Cordelia, and they start talking. Xander apologizes for being mean before, says that he wasn't thinking, and Cordelia says, "You were too busy rushing off to die for your beloved Buffy. You'd never die for me." And I've got in my notes, it's kind of a running theme with everyone Xander dates.
Yes! This is something that's huge in Xander's story arc, and continues to be so even through his relationship with Anya in season 6. It still comes up from time to time. It is like that ultimate torch that he will never let go of, I think. But yeah, I love that Cordy just called it out for what it is. But then he's just like, okay, can we just kiss and make up? And she's like, I don't want to make up, but I'm okay with the other part. And then they're just super giggly and all smiles and totally not Cordy and Xander for a few seconds. I mean, it's cute and it's a nice little moment, but it's just when did this happen?
Yeah. Kind of like earlier when did Cordelia start getting hurt when Xander's mean to her? Yeah.
They're starting to develop a different range of feelings for each other, and we'll see that carry forward, I think. But this is the first time where you really kind of see them enjoy the process of making out, even though obviously they enjoy the process of making out because they keep doing it, but they're always bickering and angry about it while they're doing it. In any of the other scenes we've seen so far, this is the time where they're just smiling and really enjoying each other's company.
They make out, and Xander steps back, and we see Willow watching them in shock. She takes off, and Xander says, "Willow, we were just..." But she's gone. And there's a real quick scene here where Willow runs past the library, and Giles tries to talk to her. And then Xander runs through, and Giles tries to talk to him. And they're both gone, and Giles says, "Well, yes, interesting." And then just goes back to what he's doing and doesn't even worry about it.
That's super consistent with Giles in this episode, because we kind of rushed through it earlier, but I thought it was really weird that when Willow was on the phone with Buffy and Buffy was all concerned about Angel, and Giles, understanding everything that's going on right now, should understand why she would be concerned that Angel is missing, yet still he says the line. He does do that on occasion, right? And I'm just like, really, Giles?
Yeah, especially with her dreams she'd been having.
Yeah, like her dreams, the fact that they went and encountered the judge and that the judge is active and everything going on. And he's just like, oh, but sometimes he just like disappears. It's fine, right?
Yeah, Giles is very unconcerned about almost everything for the beginning half of this episode. And then we have the scene in the hallway where Willow and Xander face each other after she finds out about him and Cordelia.
Mm-hmm. Allison Hannigan's ability to be like, rip your heart out, like with her emotion, but also make you laugh because she's so funny all at the same time is so good.
Perfect.
I knew it! I knew it! Well, not knew it in the sense of having the slightest idea, but I knew there was something I didn't know. You two were fighting way too much. It's not natural.
Xander's basically tries to calm her down and then is like, okay, you're overreacting. She has this perfect line that just breaks your heart after Xander says it doesn't mean anything. And Willow says, no, it just means you'd rather be with someone you hate than be with me. And she leaves.
Yeah.
And it's just, oh, poor Willow.
Yeah, it's heartbreaking. It is a weird balance to strike because we've talked about how Xander hasn't always been the nicest with Willow as far as understanding that, or at least having some awareness of her feelings for him, but kind of being very public with his other affections to her. But also on the flip side, Willow has never really had that direct ask the way that Xander did in Prophecy Girl. That kind of marked the ending to that hope, even though there's still some Buffy Xander baggage and will continue to be Buffy Xander baggage. That was the point where he put out the ask and got rejected and kind of marks the true ending of that possibility. Willow and Xander never had that.
Right. But this is kind of that for a while anyway.
Yeah. It's a very different progression of this idea of them clearly having an affection for each other and clearly having some moments like we saw in When She Was Bad, where if their timing had been a little different, then they might have ended up together in a circumstance that would have been better for both of them. But then you have the tragic thing that happens in season 3, where it's terrible timing for both of them when they kind of finally realize their affections for one another fully. But it's definitely a story of bad timing, whereas Buffy and Xander is more of a story about almost like an alternate timeline kind of story, where Xander is more of the normal boyfriend, but Buffy's so not normal and so can't live that life that it doesn't match her in so many ways.
The next scene is Buffy. Now she goes to Angel's apartment to look for him again, and he's in there. And I will point out this whole conversation, this whole scene in the script takes place in front of her house.
Yes. This is also discussed in the commentary. That's why you have that little clip where she goes to her house and then runs off because they originally planned to shoot there and in fact did start shooting there and it wasn't working. They were all in big like overcoats. It wasn't intimate. It didn't translate the way that they wanted it to translate. The actors weren't getting to the places that needed to be, and it just kind of fell apart halfway through. And that's when they decided to move it to Angel's apartment.
Yes.
And I think that was the right call.
I agree. And so we have this scene where she finally sees him for the first time after they slept together. And she is unaware that he is now Angelus. And he is just cruel.
Oh, yeah.
Like, there is no other word. He is just cruel.
Mm-hmm.
And it's the words he says, but it's also his tone and his demeanor are just classic jerk. He does it so well.
Yeah, it's great. And it's...
You just want to cry for her.
Yeah.
The way it's just like, oh, God.
It is a true, like... How Buffy is intended to work is to be both this teen drama, but also this supernatural horror show. And this works on both levels so well, where you can totally feel it from Buffy's perspective of her not realizing what's going on and just feeling like this is a boy I like who's now acting like a jerk, which is a very teen drama type thing, you know? And then you can also see it from Angelus's perspective of he is messing with her head, and it is terrifying, the psychological torment that he is already administering to Buffy.
Now, I started watching this show when I was a freshman in college, and I think it was just like a year after that I saw this episode for the first time. I wasn't that much older than the age that they were supposed to be in the actual show. And I mean, honestly, the way they lived their lives and the freedom they had and everything, they were much more like college kids than high school kids anyway. And it's cruel and it's cringy and it's like, oh my gosh, and everything when you watch it at that age. But watching it as a grown woman is just so much worse. Mm-hmm. Because you're just like, you feel for her so much as a grown woman watching a teenage girl get treated that way.
Yeah.
I don't really know how to explain how it's different, but it is so different.
Yeah. Well, and it's just like, the dialogue is so specific. Everything that Angel says. I mean, I just have notes and notes about how like, there's not a word that he says that isn't designed to mess Buffy up. Like, there is no wasted moment in any of the things that he says.
To make her doubt herself.
And on top of that, I'm going to mention the Claddagh ring again, because now, since he's putting on the act and manipulating Buffy, he is wearing the Claddagh ring to show that he is in fact taken. So the heart is facing him. Like, it is such a subtle note of manipulation that they played with, but it works so well to show off just how deep he's willing to go to do this tactic of killing her from the inside that he's working on.
He walks out of his apartment and leaves her standing there, and she just kind of stares at him in shock because, I mean, he's never treated her badly before.
Yeah.
And this is just,
Well, and I mean, the thing is, they have certainly been in fights and been in arguments, but it's always been a mutual thing when they're in those situations. This is such a different tone. And what I think is particularly interesting is that when it is Angel with a soul, you get this idea of his respect for Buffy and the fact that he, even though he occasionally mentions the age difference, he really sees them on the same level, or Buffy even above him because of the things that he has done. But what Angelus does in this moment is he uses some very specific words to talk about how naive she is, how she's got a lot to learn. He specifically calls her a kiddo. Like, it's gross the way that he's using that manipulation to make her internalize all of those things as her fault, as her inexperience. Mm-hmm. It's awful in all the best ways, is the way I like to describe that scene.
And then the next scene, we move to a little room, and Jenny Calendar's uncle is there talking to Jenny. She's basically trying to get him to tell her what he knows about the curse, so she can try and protect everyone better. He says that, everything has changed, and tells her that the curse is that Angel was supposed to suffer, not live like a person. And one moment of true happiness, of contentment, and his soul would go back. Mm-hmm. Like, he would lose his soul again. And Jenny's like, but if something's happened, then Angelus is back, and we're going to get people killed. And he has the very thoughtful comment that it is not justice that they're looking for, it's vengeance. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Which are two very different things.
Uh-huh. And I love that. That's my favorite. That's one of my favorite lines that kind of deals with the story arc. Because it kind of explains away some of the weirdness about the curse and everything like that.
Yeah, why the curse is so weird.
Yeah, and Joss Whedon has, in the commentary, talked about this idea of vengeance is a living thing. And the fact that they almost worship it like a god. And that it is kind of random, and it changes generation to generation, and it commands and it kills, and all of this as kind of a weird way that he thought up to tie together all of the loose ends that they had created, because in a lot of ways the curse doesn't make sense, and in a lot of ways they didn't really have a plan for Jenny and kind of shoehorned this whole Gypsy storyline in there, and he was trying to figure out, like, how do I make this work, and to make it be specifically vengeance that they were serving, and that vengeance is just an arbitrary does what it wants type of thing to worship. Explained away a lot of the loose ends, and this particular line of, this is not about justice, this is not a way of evening the score, this is a way to try to make this person suffer far more than is really necessary to even the score. But the trade-off of that is that vengeance is a living thing, and there's loopholes, and there's things that happen, and because of that, they've allowed Angelus to come back and continue to kill. Whereas, had they just killed him, that would have been a better solution.
Yeah, you would think.
But they ain't about that justice. They all into that vengeance stuff. Mm-hmm. To which Jenny's like, you're a fool. We're all fools.
Well, they kind of are. In this situation. In this context. So then we have the next scene, and it is Xander in the hallway of the school, and he sees Willow coming back, and she basically said, I started to go home, and then, didn't. And he says he's glad that she came back. We can't do this without you. And she has this really great line where she's like, yeah, this is not okay. I came to help, but this is not okay.
I like this interaction a lot because it shows, I think, in a weird way, how this friendship works. They can still be there and work together and support each other even when things aren't okay. Like the idea of both of them have kind of risen to this point where it's not just, oh, we're going to help Buffy out, but they themselves also feel responsible for saving the world, right? They've taken on that burden that she at this point is like, there are things that are more important than our emotional baggage that we're working through, and we're just going to put that to the side right now and focus on the things that actually matter.
And they kind of talk about how they don't have anything yet, and Xander starts to get an idea.
The acting that Nicholas Brendan does here is amazing.
Yeah. An idea. Whoa.
The waves of expression of him like working through all of this in his head. I'm just like, he is experiencing his very first thought in a while. Yeah. He apparently does not have those ever.
And then all the lights go out. And, you start to get nervous because when the lights go out like that, just all of a sudden, something bad's going to happen. It's just how it works. And they start to head back to the library, and Angel steps in, and he's kind of in the shadow in the dark, and he's like, Willow? Xander? He is suspicious here. Like, Angel's a good pretender. Like, we just saw that with Buffy. Mm-hmm. But it's like he's not even trying here.
Yeah.
Because they tell him or Xander says he has an idea, and Angel's like, oh, that doesn't matter now. I've got something to show you. And then, tells Xander to go get everybody, which he leaves to go get everybody. And he's just like, Willow, come here. I want to show you something. It's amazing. Come see it.
Amazing.
And it's just like, okay, you sound like a 6-year-old trying to get your parent to come close to the refrigerator so they'll get you a popsicle. It's...
I kind of love it, though. And here's why. I kind of love it because, in a weird way, it shows the trust that has developed. Like, Xander is the one who has the second thought and is just like, wait, that was kind of weird. I need to go and, check that out, because that was kind of suspicious. Like, he catches on, but he's the most, aware of Angel being a vampire of any of them.
He decides to go back, and this is the one and only time that Xander's mistrust of Angel comes in handy.
Yeah.
It's right here. When he's like, wait a second, that was weird.
But you're right, there's a ton of red flags here that something's weird and something is happening that shouldn't be happening. But It kind of shows that how much trust he's gained, and almost in a way how much trust he has gained. Because he isn't trying. He's just being like, ooh, it's amazing. You should come and check it out.
Right. It's so horrible. It's just like, why would anyone go check this out? Willow, is walking toward Angel, and then Jenny shows up and tells Willow to get away. Angel grabs her, and basically they all know that he's not Angel anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And he says he's got a message for Buffy.
Why don't you give it to me yourself?
Well, it's not really the kind of message you tell. It sort of involves finding the bodies of all your friends.
This can't be you.
We already covered that subject.
Angel, there must be some part of you inside that still remembers who you are.
Dream on, schoolgirl. Your boyfriend is dead. You're all gonna join him.
Leave Willow alone and deal with me.
But she's so cute and helpless. Really a turn on.
She now knows that he's not Angel anymore.
Yeah.
And that is the first really terror type thing that Angel said. He's been a jerk and cruel up until now, and then that's like, oh, wait. He really is a monster.
Yeah. It almost feels like too much too fast. And I think the reason it feels that way is because he doesn't really act on this later on. And you have to assume he has opportunities where he could corner one of the weaker Scoobies and kill them and leave them for Buffy. And we know from the past that that's what he did to Drew. And we have all of these parallels between Buffy and Drew in both Surprise and in this episode here. That it's showing that he intends to do the same thing that he did to Drew to Buffy. And that involves killing basically everybody that Buffy knows. So it seems like this is something that he would do, but to have it in this episode so blatantly and then to, like, not really have it, even though we know that he has access to Willow's room, like, he could at any point just go in and kill Willow, and it would just be a thing that he could do, and he never does. Which, I mean, I think in this commentary, Joss Whedon also said, people are always worried that I will kill Willow, and it will never happen.
I think people would revolt. would have revolted if he had killed Willow.
Yeah.
She's definitely a fan favorite. Xander sneaks up and shoves a cross in Angel's face, where he kind of roars and throws Willow, and then leaps at Buffy, kisses her, and then throws her down.
Mm-hmm.
And he takes off, and Buffy's just kind of in shock on the ground, and they're all like, "Are you okay?" She's just stands there or sits there because she is not okay.
Yeah.
She's not even close to okay.
She does so many great emotional scenes in this episode, but I think this is my favorite. This just like
devastation,
complete, like, shock of what she has just witnessed. And I just wrote in my notes, Sarah, stop.
Yeah.
It's so painful to watch. She does such an amazing job.
And then we're back in the library, and everyone's talking about it, and Giles is making sure that they are really certain. And Cordelia, I love this part. Cordelia asks what they're going to do, and Giles says, "I'm leaning toward blind panic myself," which from Giles is like, uh-oh. You know?
Yeah.
There's a line here where Buffy says, "I should have known. I saw him at the house, and he was different."
Mm-hmm.
Instead of the apartment, so they forgot to change that. She mentions that he said some things, and Giles is like, "What things?" And she's like, "It's private." And Jenny talks about how she knew he was bad, that she saw his face. And then Giles says, "If only we knew how it happened, there had to be a triggering event." And I've just got in my notes here, ouch.
Mm-hmm.
Ouch. He says, "If anyone would know Buffy, it would be you." And she can't even really talk. She's just, I can't, not now. And takes off, and Buffy's still trying to question her, and Willow, who has, been privy to conversations with Buffy about the way the relationship was moving, kind of stares after Buffy and is like, "Giles, shut up." Because Willow has realized what happened. And it's just, man, this whole episode is just upsetting.
Yeah.
It's upsetting. I've seen it 24 times, but it's still upsetting. Buffy runs off, which doesn't really seem like a good idea to me when she's so upset and Angel is around. well, not Angel, Angelus is around, but she takes off and pretty much goes home. It goes back to the library, and Xander tells him he has a plan and that he needs Cordelia's help, but they'll need a car or a big car. And Willow's like, I'll get Oz. He has a van. And Xander's like, okay, good. And there's a note in the script that says Xander is kind of weirded out by this, but that he's mature enough to ignore it. Which isn't really a thing that you would really say about Xander, but, you know.
I think...
Then they make arrangements to meet at Willow's house in 30 minutes.
Yeah.
Which, this whole conversation about the plan and what they're going to do and all that pretty much takes part without either of the two adults in the room doing or saying anything.
Yeah.
Which I find strange. Like,
yeah.
Jenny and the Watcher are just like, okay, let's let the kids organize and arrange and execute all this.
Uh-huh.
Why not?
Why not? Yeah. I was going to talk about, like, even though I kind of like the fact that Giles is in that moment of blind panic, there is definitely a turning point for Giles in this episode. Because I think the final scene with Giles and Buffy is fantastic. And it's one of my favorite Giles Buffy scenes. But for the most part, Giles is weird in this episode, right? Like, we talked about, like, he's not really cluing into things. And I think the intent for a lot of this was more of an idea of Giles being the, like, hapless dad and not really relating to the kids or knowing what's going on in the kids' lives or having that moment of realization that Buffy slept with Angel later in the episode is kind of the turning point to change Giles in this episode, whereas before he is the silly dad figure who's just like, oh, these kids are running all over the place and I can't keep up with them and I can't deal with them. They're not listening to me. I'm trying to ask them basic questions and they're not answering me. And I think it's a interesting shift with Giles where he kind of goes from treating all of them like they're kids, like he's constantly like yelling at them and kind of like trying to tell them that they need to answer him and behave and stuff like that, to this very respectful conversation that he has with Buffy at the end of the episode, where he acknowledges her as an equal and understands, like, you know, he's not gonna wag his finger at her. And it's an interesting shift. But yeah, in that same mode, he's the one here that's just like, well, let's just blind panic. And Xander's like, nope, I got a plan. I don't know, like, how much of this was intentional of making the adults kind of act childish and then the kids kind of act like the adults, and this weird shift of everybody's kind of innocent and naive and everybody's kind of has their responsibility. But with this conversation specifically, I don't think I've ever really noticed how weird Giles is in this episode until we talked kind of about, like, the little things that keep happening. But yeah, I didn't even really think about the fact that all the kids are just like, all right, we got a plan. Here, Cordy, you got to do this. We need wheels. They have this all organized, and Giles and Ginny are just standing there like, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that's basically what happens. I mean, they have a couple of lines where they talk about, should we check on Buffy? Should we let her be? And they decide to let her be, and that's it.
Yeah.
You know?
And it's one of those things, too, where it kind of frames Willow as more of the adult in the situation, because she knows what's going on, and Giles doesn't. Giles is the one who's innocent in this moment, because he doesn't understand what Buffy's going through, whereas Willow does.
Yes. And possibly Ginny does as well.
Yeah.
Like, Ginny, I don't know if Ginny is supposed to know here what happened. She probably does, because later she says something that makes you think she does, but at this point, we don't know.
Mm-hmm. And Ginny is also the one that kind of has, when Giles is having his blind panic moment, Ginny is the one that says, Giles, the kids. So she's still making that kind of separation of we're the adults and they're the kids, and we need to set a better example kind of situation here. But it's interesting. I think there's more to dig out when it comes to the kind of odd dynamic of who's the adults and who are the kids in this episode, who has the innocence and who doesn't, and the I think I think what the show was kind of going for is that they all have all of it, right? Everybody has some degree of innocence and everybody has some degree of experience. And it's funny, I think, because I'm trying to think, do we ever have a moment where Xander or Cordy or any of them realize what was the specific trigger? Because obviously we have the moment with both Willow and Giles in this episode.
I don't think there's a moment. I think that everyone just knows.
Yeah.
Later.
It's interesting that other than Joyce, who gets the revelation towards the end of the season, when Angelus just flat out tells her, Giles, I mean, it's Giles and Joyce who are the last that we see find out about this, and they are Buffy's parental figures. Even though there's others that kind of find out off screen, these are the two that we see.
Yeah, well, I mean, we saw Willow. We saw Willow realize.
Yeah, but she realized before Giles and definitely before Joyce. So I think it's interesting that, in a weird way, there's an innocence to being a parent too, right? Of thinking, I've got all this time. My kids aren't going to grow up for years and years and years. And then that loss of innocence of being like, my kid isn't a child anymore, and in fact going through these things that I'm not sure how to deal with.
Yeah.
I don't know. I think there's more to dig out of that than we're gonna do in this episode. But just some food for thought.
Meanwhile, they decide to meet at Willow's house in 30 minutes, and then we go to the factory where we see Angel telling Drusilla and Spike about what just happened and talking about, they kind of have a conversation about Angel didn't kill her yet. And Drew realizes he wants to hurt her like you hurt me. And
Spike starts whining again.
Yeah, he does. He starts whining again about why Angel won't just kill her. But, that's kind of the difference between Angel and Spike. Angel tortures people.
Yeah, Angel doesn't just kill people, yeah.
He will fixate on someone and obsess about them and torture them. And, Spike just is kind of like, hey, look at her, I'm going to kill her. He doesn't have these deep thoughts about it and doesn't obsess about it. He's just like,
It's a through line that really works and continues. Like, there's that amazing exchange in Angel season 5 between them, where they're kind of comparing notes on how they acted as soulless vampires. And Spike's like, I never really thought about the nature of evil. I just did it because it was fun. And Angel's like, I totally was in it for the evil.
Yeah. Yep. So that ends, and then we have a heartbreaking scene of Buffy entering her room, taking the clotter ring off, laying down on her bed and just sobbing. No words or anything like that, just sobbing.
Yeah. Oh, man.
Then she dreams, and she's dreaming about what happened between her and Angel the night before. And then she stands at a grave during the day, and Angel is there and tells her she has to know what to see. And she looks around, and Miss Calendar, Jenny, is in her dream.
Yeah,
it's one of those prophecy dreams that the Slayer has.
And it's interesting. There's a couple of different layers here. I like. So it starts with the artsy sex. Is what I've titled it.
Yeah, pretty much.
Starts with the artsy sex, and then has the I love you, and then has this horrible transition where it flashes real quick to Angel killing the woman in the alley. But then you have Buffy at a graveside, right? And the through line that we haven't really discussed a lot is the idea of the death of Angel, right? The losing of a soul is, in a way, a death. And that Buffy is not only dealing with the fact that, again, there's this demon walking around that looks like Angel and has all the memories of Angel and stuff like that, very much the same way that you would react to a mortal being turned into a vampire, right? The idea of the soul and the humanity, and Angel talks about, she made me feel like a human. That's not something that you can just, forgive kind of deal, is that in this losing of the soul, Angel has died. and Buffy is mourning that loss, and to have this, like, graveside dream, and to know that there's a part of Buffy that feels responsible for this, feels responsible for killing Angel.
Right, because, well, I mean, if she hadn't have slept with him, he wouldn't be evil, which kind of makes the notion of sex as something you get punished for in teen TV and movies and media very literal.
Mm-hmm. And again, I'm gonna shout out the commentary. The commentary for this episode's really great. I recommend everybody who has access to the DVDs to go and watch it if they haven't already. But it is really great. There's a lot of deep analysis that Joss Whedon goes into, but he actually does talk about how he didn't necessarily really want to do this storyline, that the original idea of the girl who has sex in the horror films and then dies is stupid. And the idea of brutally punishing Buffy for having sex for the first time was something that he was hesitant to explore, but then he talks about, inevitably, this show is kind of about punishing people for everything that they do. It doesn't matter how big or how mild of an event in their life it is, they're going to get some form of punishment in it. And he talks a lot about emotional punishment versus physical punishment, and how physical punishment feels very arbitrary to him, but emotional punishment is something that Buffy can use and grow from. And that was the idea of this type of punishment versus, like, oh, these two young teens had sex in a horror film, they're dead.
And I'm not sure if they had gone any other way of Angel losing his soul. I just don't think it would have had the same impact as this way does.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think they could have come up with another way.
Well,
that would have been as good.
And I think it's also important because it solves the issue of the Buffy Angel romance. To have these two be so in love and so clearly belong together,
mm-hmm.
and to have such a harsh reason of why they cannot be together ever, like, yeah, and to be that strict about it. And I would say that there's even an argument to be made that with this knowledge that Angel has going forward, that even if they slept together again, the knowledge of and the fear would keep that moment of true happiness from happening again, right? Because it's the blissful, unaware, the ignorance that he had, and the post-coital bliss that they shared that was the trigger of losing the soul. But with the full context of knowing how the curse works, there could even be an argument made that they could potentially get away with it because Angel would be so paranoid that he couldn't possibly have true happiness, right? It would be terrifying.
Which would be a really good argument, except there is a season of Angel where he falls in love again and loses his soul just with the dream of sex with that person.
Yeah.
So, which I've always thought was kind of...
Is that how that works, though? It's been a while since I've watched the episode. You're talking about the one where they intentionally remove his soul?
Yes.
I don't know. I don't know how that worked. It's been a while since I've watched that episode, but it's something to look at when we get to it.
Yeah, that's how I remember it.
That's an interesting thought. Yeah. Interesting.
And we know he has sex with others, and it doesn't happen. It has to be someone he loves.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
But it is interesting because I think a lot of the fandom have rejected the idea that sex is the cause, right? They don't like the idea that it's specifically sex, even though the show kind of pokes fun at it occasionally, and talks about how Angel can't ever have sex.
Yeah.
Which is funny on many levels, but also doesn't really fit the theme. That's why the idea is that it's specifically that moment of bliss of just being in each other's arms and having not a care in the world, and that's the true happiness with Buffy that he experiences. Now, I don't think, like when I make that argument, I think even with that argument, there is still that risk, and Angel never in a million years would take it, right?
Right.
Like, even though there could be the argument made that the awareness of how the curse works is potentially enough to prevent that moment of bliss from ever happening again, the idea of true happiness and the rarity of it is something that they explore later on, especially in the Angel show. And Wesley has that great dialogue of, like, how rare true happiness really is. But just the slightest chance, you know, even if it was like a 0.5% chance that he would experience true happiness again being with Buffy, he'd be like, nah, we're not taking that risk, because he is that kind of person, and we see that again and again. But yeah, Buffy wakes up after seeing Ginny. That's where we were in the episode.
Yes.
And she is determined, and she is marching through the school, and she enters in Ginny's classroom and just slams her so brutally against the desk. And, I mean, I looked at it pretty closely. It looks like it's the actual actress doing this stunt. It looks like it's actually Rabia Lamort taking that hit. Like slamming against the desk. It's so painful looking at it. It's so brutal.
So Buffy, you know, when she does this, she's like, you know, did you know? What did you know? Did you do it? Did you change him? She's just like all this stuff. And Giles is like, you know, Buffy, calm down. You can't just accuse people. And then Ginny says, I didn't know exactly. And they both freeze and look at her. And Giles, you can just see the look of hurt on his face, like, oh, she knew something.
Yeah.
Ginny explains that she was sent there to watch them and told to keep Buffy and Angel apart, but she didn't know what would happen. She would have told Buffy, and Buffy's like, well, so it is me. I did it. And this is when Ginny says, I think so.
Yeah.
I mean, and then that's like, Ginny knows pretty much what happened.
So,
Giles,
before we continue, I hate this.
Okay.
And I hate it for a very specific reason. Buffy taking on this guilt and being like, I'm the one that caused this, seems like a very Buffy thing to do. We saw that a similar thing in Ted, where Buffy really puts a lot of weight on her own shoulders and takes responsibility for things that really she had no way of knowing or could ever really feel responsible for. But the fact that Ginny agrees when Buffy says, so it was me, I did this, and Ginny's like, I think so, I'm just like, no.
Well, I don't think Ginny is meaning that as in this was your fault. This happened because you had sex. You shouldn't have had sex. I think Ginny is just kind of confirming that this happened for this reason. It's because he loves you. It's because of this. I don't think she was being cruel, as in, yeah, it's your fault, you know?
And I don't think she was necessarily being cruel, but I think, here's my issue with Ginny, is that we have that amazing scene in Ted where she has that conversation with Giles about needing time, needing space, about taking a certain amount of weight off of her shoulders, right? And then you have this moment with Buffy, where not only does she kind of confirm the negative feelings that Buffy's feeling towards herself, then you have a moment where Giles kind of interrupts, but Ginny actually continues talking a little bit there, where she starts to say something like, I mean, if you... And it could have been twisted in a way that she was trying to take some of that guilt away from Buffy, but the way it's shot, like the way the sentence starts, it makes me start to connect the dots in, like, she's trying to figure out the specific act and was going to kind of ask point blank what happened. And I think this is the one moment where I have the biggest disconnect with this idea of Joss Whedon talking about how much he didn't want to do this storyline. Because I think if he really didn't want to do this storyline of guilt-tripping teen sex and talking about all of the risks and stuff like that, this is another moment where you could have had just a simple line that was something like, instead of her confirming that Buffy did this, saying something like, this wasn't your fault, or you didn't know, or something, just something.
Yeah, but I think if Jenny had done that at this point, then the conversation with Giles at the end of the episode would not be as impactful as it is.
And there may be an argument to that, but if that's the case, just have a moment where Jenny's silent, and then continue on. I don't like the confirmation. The confirmation really bothers me, because this is a point where Buffy point blank says, I did this, and Jenny agrees.
I can see that, but I also I really don't think it was meant that way. I think it's them trying to figure out what did it, because they've just learned that this curse has an escape clause, that there's something that can happen that can take his soul away again. And they're all trying to figure out what each person knew and how it happened. And I don't think Jenny's trying to assign guilt.
My problem is with the writers. I think this is something that you always have to kind of keep in context, is that people saying something in the moment is different than a writer's room making a decision and then having it go through so many readings and then still putting it out to a young audience. And I think that's the part that always upsets me, is that this was a moment where they could have started to, could have started to put out a message, or at least not confirm Buffy's doubt on herself and her guilt, and they chose to continue down that route, to maybe have the payoff with Giles work a little bit more, or maybe just because that's the stereotypical thing to do, and they were going for the stereotypical thing to do the plot twist later, where it's really, no, she hasn't lost her innocence, and her parents still love her, and your life doesn't end when you have sex, kind of deal. That's when I really complain about that kind of stuff. Is I'm really complaining about the fact that a group of writers decided this was a good message to put out there, and not necessarily that this is something that Jenny would never do or something like that, but the fact that there's another layer to storytelling.
Mm-hmm. I can go with that one. That I can get on board with. And Giles looks at Buffy and says, but how do you know that you were responsible? And she kind of looks up at him with this broken look on her face. And he goes, oh. And he looks shocked and steps back and does that thing where he takes his glasses off.
I noted that.
Everyone in this scene does it so well. And it's awesome because literally the only note in the script is that there's a moment of uncomfortable silence. Mm-hmm. And they do way more than that.
Oh, yeah.
Like, they play this so well. And it's just like, oh. And it's Giles, and you could tell he's realizing what Buffy is going through. At the same time, he's also just kind of shocked that this is what happened.
Yeah.
That this is how it happened.
I think this kind of supports that little bit of idea that I was going with, is that this is, in a way, Giles' loss of innocence in this scenario. And this is the turning point for Giles in this episode, is when he makes the realization and has all these connections, even though he quote-unquote has all of those experiences and shouldn't be surprised by it. He still is, because his daughter figure, his Slayer, has gone through this experience, and he was naive enough not to realize. Mm-hmm. But yeah, it's beautiful. It's beautiful. And
it really is.
Buffy, again, cleaning up this mess real fast. Buffy's like, we'll just curse him again. And Jenny's explaining that those magics are lost and that she can't help them. And that's when she's like, well, take me to someone who can.
I want to point out in this scene, I love the moment when Buffy's like, curse him again. Can't you do that? And when she says that, Giles is in the background, lifts his head up with this kind of look of hope on his face. Like, can you?
Yeah.
Like, is this the solution? Can this save the day? And I love that little look of hope on his face where he's just like,
yeah. There's so many little Like, the actors gave it all. They're so good. And, like, there's so many little details in the background. What Joss Whedon did a lot of in this episode is that he did a lot of stuff where all of the characters were in the scene, and some of them were, like, way in the back and didn't have any dialogue, but were just there to show the presence, to show that everybody's together on this and working on this. And it's just, there's a lot of little details where you could just tell the atmosphere of this episode was taken with such a higher level of gravity.
I bet this was a very intense episode to film.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
I'm sure. Poor Sarah Michelle Gellar. But yeah, like I said before, we cut to Uncle Gypsy, who is, I know he has an actual name, but I always refer to him as Uncle Gypsy. And
the thing is, he doesn't.
He has an actual name. I can't remember what it is, but he has an actual name, because I know.
Okay, in the script, he never has an actual name. They just call him Gypsy Man.
Gypsy Man. Which
I find kind of awkward, so I just call him the uncle when I'm talking, because I'm not going to say Gypsy Man.
But it cuts to him, and he's like, I knew she would bring you. And it's not Buffy at all. It's Angel. And he's super polite as he's preparing to murder this guy.
Yeah. And there is a long conversation here that was cut out where Angel and the uncle talk. The uncle calls him Evil One, and Angel says, oh no, you're going to hurt my feelings. And he says, what do you want? And Angel says, a whole lot. Got a lot of lost time to make up for. Say, I guess that's kind of your fault, isn't it? And the uncle holds up a cross toward his face, and Angel knocks it out of his hand, which I kind of have to note is very different from the reaction when Xander held up a cross earlier. Then Angel says, you gypsy types, you go and curse people, and you really don't care who gets hurt. Of course, you did give me an escape clause, so I got to thank you for that. And the uncle says, you're an abomination. The day you stop suffering for your crimes, you are no longer worthy of a human soul. And Angel says, well, I guess that's today, because that pesky critter's all gone, so we can get down to business. And then he kneels in front of the uncle and says, don't worry, it won't hurt a bit after the first hour.
I love how self-aware that entire conversation is. That's literally just Joss Whedon, right? It's just like, yeah, I know none of this makes sense, but we're just going to point it all out that it doesn't make sense, and they'll make it okay.
Yeah. And it's kind of showing Angelus's personality and everything a little bit more, because he's like, yeah, I'm fixing to torture you for hours. You know?
So from there, we cut to the army base that somehow exists in Sunnydale, but we've already kind of had that conversation. The funny note I had, though, is that it is pouring rain, and it is the middle of the night, yet somehow they're still doing maneuvers. So
yeah,
it's a really dedicated army base on top of that.
It's really weird. That's weird.
They pull up in the van, and Xander's like, We'll pass the package through that window, and Xander and Cordy exit, leaving Oz and Willow to hang out in the van. And Xander and Cordy are sneaking in and are caught just outside of the armory, and this is when it's kind of revealed that Xander remembers info about being a soldier from Halloween, which is something I've complained about because it doesn't really make sense the way that episode is done. I feel like it's very shoehorned in. This idea that Xander has additional knowledge now because he dressed up as a soldier on Halloween. Because then it opens up the door of just like, so do all of these kids that dressed up as demons now know a whole bunch about being a demon and all of this information about demons? Like, that's scary. Yeah. That's a thing.
We never really talk about if Buffy remembers a whole bunch of stuff about being a noblewoman in the 16th century.
Yeah. It's just, it doesn't work. But, yeah, so Xander uses this knowledge to convince the soldier to allow him to give Cordy a tour, and the soldier says, like, you got 20 minutes.
I just need 5. Okay, I said that last part.
Also, the door to the armory is just not locked. I mean, they had to go through a thin chain link fence, and then the actual armory door is just open.
Well, the fence would keep people out.
Yeah.
So it didn't matter.
I mean, that's leveled up security for Sunnydale, having a fence.
Yeah. And they start looking for something, and then we cut to Willow and Oz in the van, where they kind of talk about what they're doing for a little while, and then Willow just all of a sudden says, "Do you want to make out with me?" And Oz is like, "What?" There's a couple of lines throughout this conversation that are cut out, but it's not really anything big. Just, Willow and Oz cuteness, because they're always cute together.
We'll probably talk about this more in phases, but I'm just going to drop this here to linger. I feel like there's a lot of things that Willow and Oz do that are super cute that if they tried to do with any other couple, I would be like, "Ugh!"
Yeah, a lot of this stuff only works with Willow and Oz. Willow says, "Forget it, I'm sorry," and then pauses for a minute, and she's like, "Do you?" And then Oz does this thing where he tells her about sometimes fantasizing about kissing her. And I'm sorry, but there is no teenage boy on the face of the earth that is this smooth. There aren't even really college boys that are this smooth. It just doesn't exist. So anyway, I just have to point that out. So he tells her that, and then she's, she's really wanting to kiss him, and he says, "But I'm not going to kiss you."
To the casual observer, it would appear that you're trying to make your friend Xander jealous, or even the score, or something. And that's on the empty side. See, in my fantasy, when I'm kissing you, you're kissing me.
Again, I'm going to go with there's no teenage boy on the face of the earth that's smooth. So he does this really well. And then he's like, "It's okay. I can wait." And again, this is the 17-year-old boy.
Yeah.
Or possibly 18. Then they hear the window opening, and he says, "We're up," and goes to get, help Xander and Cordelia, while Willow just kind of watches him. And you could tell she is thinking, "Hey, I like this guy."
Yeah.
I mean, she liked him before, but this is, could be real.
Yeah. This is what Joss Whedon points out as the moment that she fell in love with him kind of deal.
Is it?
Yeah. And
you can kind of see it.
For me, I think what's interesting is that it starts out with Willow doing something very not Willow, right? Where she's just so blunt, like, "Do you want to make out with me?" And then it kind of moves into this space that Willow is almost like the most Willow, where she is so in the moment, and then she has that moment after he says, "Oh, I'm not gonna kiss you," and she's just like, "But freeze frame."
Yeah.
And it's just a lovely transition of this is that true turning point, because we talked about the moment in Prophecy Girl with Buffy and Xander, and you kind of mentioned that kind of happens with Buffy, or with Willow and Xander in this episode. But this is the moment where she starts out the scene Oz even calls her out, "You're trying to make Xander jealous," and then it moves to where it's totally not about Xander at all anymore, and it's just about Oz, and it's all done with a look, and it's great.
Oh yeah, 100% done with that look. She does it so well. This is just an amazing episode.
It's really good, isn't it?
Yeah. Then the next scene, we have Buffy, Giles, and Jenny entering Jenny's uncle's room, which I had in my notes earlier, and we got off on another subject. So I'm not clear if this is a hotel room or a small apartment or what, and it doesn't make it clear in the script book. But Angel walks in without being invited.
Mm-hmm.
And I cannot remember if it's canon that he can do that in hotel rooms or not.
Yeah, I don't know. He definitely can't in apartments, because we have evidence that he can't in apartments in different moments.
Which makes sense.
But a hotel, I guess, falls under fraternity rules, because he can also enter those without an invite.
And I'm not sure, because I'm remembering that episode of Angel where they do the flashbacks to the Hyperion Hotel when it was an actual hotel and Angel stayed there, and I cannot remember if he was able to enter other guest rooms without being invited or not. I might have to look it up. But he totally entered this guy's room without being invited. So, you know, and I wonder at what point a hotel room becomes a residence. Like, you have to stay there for a week.
Yeah, I mean, because there are people
there for, you know,
there are people
today.
who live in hotels. I mean,
exactly. And you kind of get the impression that storyline in Angel with the Hyperion Hotel is that a lot of people live there. Mm-hmm. Angel definitely does. So, anyway, I just wanted to point that out that he walks in, and I had that in my notes earlier, but there's so much to talk about.
So much.
So, anyway, they walk into the either hotel room or apartment, whichever one it is, and see the body of Jenny's uncle, and written on the wall in blood is, "Was it good for you too?"
Yes.
Yes.
So much done with so little. Ugh. And this is when Buffy and Giles have the conversation where Giles is like, he's just trying to make it harder on you, and Buffy's like, no, he's making it easier. I know what I have to do. I have to kill him. And yeah, it's the first step in Buffy moving this direction, but it takes a long time.
Yeah, well, and I mean, that makes sense that it takes a long time.
Yeah.
And then we're at the factory, and they are all getting ready to go with the judge to kill people, basically.
It's a kill people party.
It's a kill people party. And Angel's kind of tells Spike, it's too bad you can't come. And he threatens that I won't be in this chair forever. And they leave to go. It's, you know, it's just basically some banter as they're leaving to go kill people.
But at least the judge looks spiffy.
Yes, at least he looks spiffy. Then we are in Giles's office, and Xander and Oz bring a crate in and tell Buffy happy birthday. And that's kind of a realization that it's the day after her birthday. Like, all this stuff has happened in like 48 hours.
Yeah.
At the most. Yeah. Which kind of makes you again realize how intense all this stuff is.
Uh-huh.
So Buffy's like, you know, we're going to go to the factory and then we'll do this. And they talk about Xander showing Buffy how to use what's in the box. They're very secretive about what's in the box up until now.
You do have this moment where Jenny is coming in and says that she just wants to help. And it's one of those things, you have the two moments of recognizing the betrayal or the supposed betrayal, where Buffy is like, just go, and she kind of presses a little further, and then Giles says she said go. And this marks the second fallout of Ginny and Giles. And
yeah, but it shows Giles supporting Buffy.
And it shows Giles supporting Buffy, which is, in any relationship I think Giles would ever have, I think he would always choose Buffy over his significant other. And that is a true testament to how strong that bond is.
Mm-hmm. It's kind of a parent bond. Mm-hmm. I believe most parents would choose their children.
Yeah.
So, okay, the next scene is them at the factory, and they're like, it's empty, where are they? And I could see Spike hiding in his chair, like kind of behind a wall, listening to them, which is a nice little tidbit. They discuss where the judge might be, and Oz says in response to Cordelia saying, you know, where would people line up to get massacred? And he says, if I was going to line up, I know where I'd be. And they go to the mall. And we see on a balcony level in the mall, the judge comes in, and Drew and Angel go on each side of him, which with their costumes are mostly black with like some accents and stuff. And it is really good imagery.
Oh, yeah.
The way they stand on either side of him. And it gets even better, but the way they're standing on either side of him.
Well, and there's something about the starkness of a mall, because all malls kind of look the same and have that weird, like, beigey white coloring all over the place. And then you have this dark, contrasting presence of those three standing at the top and all of the white surrounding them. This section is just iconic shot after iconic shot after iconic shot. Because immediately after the judge starts to zap everybody, we cut to the Scoobies exiting the elevator, and Buffy is giving commands and letting everybody know what their roles are. And it's just an amazing shot of them walking down the hall, going into battle. That is used in many season openings. It's a great shot.
Then we go back to the judge, and he's like burning people, and they start connecting each other, and then all of a sudden he is hit in the chest with an arrow, and it kind of breaks the connection he has to everyone, and he pulls it out of his chest and it's kind of like, who dares to hit me with an arrow? Buffy is like kind of across the mall, standing on top of a popcorn machine. The judge sees her and is like, fool, no weapon forge can stop me. And then she picks up a rocket launcher. Mm-hmm. Which is, the thing that they stole from the base and that they were being so secretive about in the box. And I'm going to go ahead and say, I don't know a whole lot about military bases, but I mean, are rocket launchers just like standard equipment to have on them? Like, would that just be on a random base in Sunnyvale, California?
Yeah, clearly it would be, especially if it was in an armory that was unlocked, guarded by one lazy soldier behind a chain link fence that's easily cut through with a pair of handheld clippers. That's all. Yeah, I mean, that's some top level security there. So I both love and hate the rocket launcher. There's part of me that's just like, that's awesome. Buffy with a rocket launcher is so cool. But again, it just proves
great.
Yeah, it just proves the point that the judge is useless.
Yeah. And Buffy's like, that was then, this is now, and picks up the rocket launcher and
and bye-bye judge.
Bye-bye judge. And that's it. That's the end of the judge. And there's this really, really cool imagery that I absolutely love. And every time I watch this episode, I have to rewind it a couple of times to see this. But it's where Drusilla and Angel realize what's about to happen. And they look at each other and they start moving down the stairs on either side of the balcony. And it's kind of in slow motion. And they get to the railing, and then just both of them jump off and kind of dive off.
Yeah.
And it's so neat the way it looks.
It is. In fact, Joss Whedon talks about it in the commentary and all the technical stuff he goes through to do that kind of stuff. The thing that he said specifically is that he learned pretty early on from someone else that a lot of times when you do an explosion, people just do a static shot. And he learned that you should, in fact, use motion when doing an explosion. And that's what he did in that. Like, he has all of that movement. He has, like, that subtle pan in while the explosion happens. And the idea of that adds a layer to the event that you don't necessarily get from a static shot in a very subtle way. But you're dead on, like, everything he did there. Everything. He did very intentionally to set up that kind of reveal. And then, of course, the amazing what's that do right before the explosion. It's just great.
Yeah. It goes back to the Scoobies, and Buffy says it's my best birthday present ever. And Willow says, do you think he's dead? Which I find hilarious because he was just blown up by a rocket launcher. Buffy tells him to pick up the pieces, and she sees Angel trying to get away. We don't really see where Drusilla goes. There's a really cool scene of her jumping up, whimpering, and running away because she's so upset that, her plan is...
Buffy blew up her birthday present with her birthday present.
Yeah. But then Buffy pursues Angel, and they end up in a hallway in the mall where Buffy seems to have a lot of fights in hallways in the mall.
This mall, by the way, I assume this is the same mall. This mall has a movie theater built into it and also an arcade. Like, this is a good mall.
So they go and they kind of start fighting, and Angel says some really cruel stuff to her, and she's like, it doesn't work anymore. I know you're not Angel. And he's like, you think that? And then he says, you made me the man I am today. So he's trying to lay on the guilt.
Yeah,
he knows,
tapping into that. That's great.
Yeah, he knows that she would feel that way. And so he's like, yeah, I'm going to make this worse.
That works for me because that is a show that if the villain is saying these things, then the idea is that what the villain says is not right, is not accurate. So the fact that he's laying into that guilt, I think, supports the idea that it's not Buffy's fault rather than the idea that Buffy's carrying of this guilt and the weight of what she's done being the cause of Angel losing his soul. I think Angelus knows very well that it's not actually her fault, but he can manipulate the hell out of her by making her think it is.
Right. And honestly, I feel like it's kind of the fault of the gypsies. If they didn't want him to lose his soul again, they should have explained what would happen.
I will say, it's something that I thought about earlier on when we were talking about him killing the uncle, and I was just like, really, the only kind of like significant characters that we see Angel kill are the uncle and then Ginny. So, I mean, I guess it's the gypsies get their comeuppance because they're the ones that die at the hands of Angelus.
We see this really funny scene where the Scoobies are picking up all the pieces of the judge, and we see Oz like find an arm, and he's like, arm?
Flashing back to Buffy's birthday party.
Yeah. And then we're Buffy and Angel. I didn't connect that. That he doesn't want to pick it up because it strangled.
Yeah, it choked out Buffy
at the birthday party. That, I didn't even connect that. That's why he's pointing at the arm, saying arm. He's like, yeah, this thing strangles people. I'm not going to pick it up.
Not going to touch it.
Makes sense.
Oz ain't no fool.
Yeah, I can't believe I didn't connect that. Okay, so then we're back to Angel and Buffy fighting, and she basically just wails on him.
Yeah.
And she beats him up so bad, and then he's on the ground. She pulls out a stake, and she looks at his face, and she can't do it.
Mm-hmm.
She just can't do it. And he says that to her. He's like, you can't kill me. And she kicks him between the legs with basically all of her Slayer strength. And he doubles over and collapses on the ground, kind of, which, if he wasn't an evil vampire, would be a fitting revenge for what he did to her.
Yeah.
But, not quite enough considering he's an evil vampire.
Yeah, there is. So, I totally buy that Buffy's struggling and can't kill Angelus because he looks like Angel, and that takes her time, and she even says, give me time, I'll get there. And I also totally buy that Angel won't immediately kill Buffy because of this idea of killing her from the inside, right? He wants to make her miserable, make her insane before he actually bothers killing her. So I think it works as a really good way to extend this conflict, but also when you're watching this, you're just like, maybe somebody should have stepped up and really tried to make this happen faster because, we already know that Kendra exists, and she had no problems trying to kill Angel when he had a soul, so...
So, yeah, let's call Kendra, have her come do it. Hey, Kendra, got a problem here? You think you can come help me?
We got a vampire that really needs taken care of, and it's a significant situation that Buffy can't handle right now. Yeah. Can you come and do some slaying for us?
Yeah, that would make sense. So then we have this wonderful, sweet, touching scene in Giles's car. He's giving Buffy a ride home. And they're talking, and he kind of warns her a little bit that it's not over, that he's going to come after you. And she says, you must be so disappointed in me.
No, I'm not.
This is all my fault?
I don't believe it is. Do you want me to wag my finger at you and tell you that you acted rashly? You did. And I can. I know that you loved him. And he's proven more than once that he loved you. You couldn't have known what would happen. The coming months are going to be hard. I suspect on all of us. But if it's guilt you're looking for, Buffy, I'm not your man. All you will get from me is my support. And my respect.
And he says the most supportive words that are just great.
Mm-hmm.
It's just an amazing scene. Very sweet.
Yeah. This is the moment that redeems a lot of the issues that I have with the punishment after sex kind of storyline that they're going with, and that you have this moment where even though Joyce is her biological mother and all of that, and she clearly has a good connection with Joyce, and you have this scene following up, and Joyce and Buffy have this moment, Giles is much more informed about Buffy at this point than Joyce is, and in a way has a deeper connection with Buffy because of that. And to have this moment where someone who Buffy cares about so much, who would absolutely be devastating if he was disappointed in her.
Yes.
Perhaps even more so than Joyce, because she's used to Joyce being disappointed in her, but she's not used to Giles being disappointed in her in that same way, because he has the full context. And to have this moment where she has so much doubt about herself and is ready to feel the brunt of that reflected in Giles, and Giles denies that and says that I could do those things, but you know that you loved him, and he has proven that he loved you, and you could not have known what would have happened, and there is nothing that you should feel guilt about. And an interesting note is that this was filmed on the same night that they had the failed Buffy Angel scene outside of the house before they realized that they needed to move it to the apartment. And so Sarah was apparently deeply upset that they couldn't get that scene to work, and so used all of that emotional stuff in this scene as well, because she was already just exhausted and felt awful because they had a scene that just wasn't working and she couldn't get it to work. And so she took all of that energy and put it into this scene. And in a way, I think it made this scene better, and then also obviously the shift to the apartment made that other scene significantly better.
Yes, it did.
So maybe it all worked out that Joss Whedon messed up and had originally tried to film that outside the house. So from there, we cut inside, and Buffy's sitting on the couch. You got the TV playing Stowaway, and you have Alice Faye singing. The lyrics actually go, "Good night, my love. My moment with you is ending." Every bit of this song is just so perfect to this situation, and so beautiful and hopeful in the movie, and so tragic and terrible when you think about what Buffy's going through. Oh man, but only song in the episode, and I'm gonna put it on the playlist. It's just gonna be the movie clip, because it's from a movie, but it's good. It's like the perfect choice for this moment, and this little back and forth between Joyce when she brings out the cupcakes and kind of apologizes for not doing better for her birthday, but they're still gonna go shopping, and kind of shows that normalcy again, right? That idea that Joyce has no idea what's going on. And she kind of asks, what did you do for your birthday? And she says, I got older. And this is when Joyce says, you look the same to me, which is probably the best thing that Buffy could have heard at that moment. I always cherish the little moment where she has this line of, well, go ahead, blow out the candle, make a wish. And Buffy's like, I'll just let it burn. I think this scene so perfectly reflects Buffy's maturity and her loss of innocence, while also retaining innocence in this scene, because what you have is this moment where Joyce confirms you're not any different, you're still the same Buffy. But then you have this moment of also this kind of very childish activity that people do on their birthday of blowing out the candle and making a wish. And Buffy kind of chooses to move past that stage in her life and accept that there are consequences to what she did. And maybe she's not responsible for them because she didn't know the full context of what would happen. But it is confirmed by Giles that there is parts of Buffy and Angel's relationship that were handled rashly. And so there is some responsibility that Buffy feels there that is earned, that is not just her taking on way too much weight and feeling all of this guilt that I don't agree with. I think there's enough evidence to say that there's a responsibility that she can take for some of the things, but the amount that she takes on is way too much. But this kind of moment where she accepts that she's still a child in her mother's eyes and can curl up with her mother and all of this, but also kind of rejecting this birthday tradition that is very childish. It's just like a really beautiful balance of showing that she's growing up, but she's still innocent.
Yeah. I will say that this is one of those scenes, and I've talked about it before, but this is one of those scenes where I feel like as a mother, Joyce should be more concerned about what her child is feeling and doing and acting like.
Yeah.
Like this situation, just let it burn. And the way Buffy is, as a parent, I would be questioning more about what's happening.
Well, and I almost wonder, this is going way deeper than the show ever goes, but I almost wonder if Joyce has kind of accepted that Buffy has either like bipolar tendencies or maybe some kind of imbalance, because there's moments where she is super energetic and there are moments where she is super down, and I wonder if there's just a part of Joyce that just kind of accepts that this is the way Buffy acts sometimes, that sometimes she's just in these moods.
And that's fine if that is what Joyce thinks, though. But again, as a parent, if you feel that your child has, these wild mood swings or possibly bipolar tendencies or so, why aren't you getting her help?
Yeah. Well, and
just either way, you're a little unconcerned there, Joyce.
Yeah, and I think the thing is, one, there's nothing to really support that from Joyce, that's what she thinks. But also, I think that there could be an argument made that it's kind of, it's not, because it's not in the show at all, but it's also kind of a commentary on the way people deal with mental health. And they choose to ignore it sometimes, and how that's not healthy. But that is a much more typical thing for parents to do. And something that a lot more awareness has been developed about. There is nothing in this show that really delves into that until maybe like Normal Again in season 6. But the fact of the matter is that Joyce should have concerns about Buffy's mental health, but the fact that she doesn't also kind of feels like a moment of denial on Joyce's part. And I don't agree that that's the right thing for Joyce to do, but I also think I kind of go back to this idea that there's a part of Joyce, even though in the show she's a much more active mother, there's a part of me that always reflects back on the movie and how it kind of shows that Buffy's parents aren't in any way involved in Buffy's life, are so disconnected from Buffy, are not paying attention to Buffy at all. Buffy can get away with anything because her parents just don't care and don't pay attention. That I feel like there could be a remnant of that in Joyce, that there's this, she's trying to be a better mom. You see all of the self-help books and the like parenting books that she works through at the beginning of the show. She's trying to be a better mom, but there's just certain aspects about her that aren't fully there yet. And part of that is denying the fact that she needs to do more for Buffy, but she just isn't there yet. And a lot of that is her not understanding what's going on. I think mostly in this episode, this is chosen because this thematically works for the episode of this moment of innocence and curling up in your mom's lap. But when you have a 17-year-old daughter who acts this way, I think a lot of parents will be like, what's going on? What happened? Whereas a 5-year-old just being like, kind of curling up in your lap is perhaps more expected.
Yeah. Well, that is the end of the episode.
Yes! This was a long one.
Yes, it was.
Oh, but a deeply, deeply important episode, and one that I have no problem giving this time. And I mean, honestly, there's a lot of stuff that I didn't talk about in this episode that I could have, so it is one of the best episodes of Buffy, and is definitely a huge turning point for the series as a whole. I cannot wait for this analysis, because I feel like I've never dived quite this deep into Buffy. And this analysis of this particular story arc is one that I am probably the most excited for, because it is, in my mind, the Buffy story arc. The Angelus Buffy story arc of the latter half of season 2 is so rich in so many ways. But we'll be back next week with Phases, which is exciting. We'll get into some more lighthearted antics with Willow and Oz and all of that goodness.
Wonderful, wonderful special effects that exist in Phases.
Oh, man. Those awkward werewolf ears.
Okay.
All right. Thank you so much for listening to this exceptionally long podcast, and we will be back again next week. This is where we say bye.
Bye.